reading from the letter of Paul to the Hebrews. In the days when Christ Jesus was in the flesh, he offered prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Son though he was, he learned obedience from what he suffered, and when he was made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. The word of the Lord.
Our second reading for this Sunday comes from the letter to the Hebrews. We have been reflecting on the heart of Jesus as the seat of the new covenant between God and God's people. In the first reading from Jeremiah, we have the promise of a new covenant where God's law will be inscribed not anymore on tablets of stones, but on the hearts of people. So the covenant will now be seen and experienced from within. And from the heart of the people, they will recognize God as their only God. And they will belong to God. As God says, "You are mine." So the covenant, not as an exterior, external event, but something deep in the hearts of men and women. Where do we find this new covenant fulfilled? As Christians, especially as guided by the second reading from the letter to the Hebrews, we say the new covenant is found in Jesus Christ, whose death we will commemorate next week. Remember, in the Last Supper, he even said that there will be a new covenant in his blood. In him, in his death, a new covenant, the new covenant, promised by God through Jeremiah, will be fulfilled. But God said in Jeremiah that the covenant will be in the heart of men and women. Let us look at the heart of Jesus. In the second reading, Jesus is depicted as someone crying out to God with tears, with supplication. This reminds us of the prayer of Jesus in Gethsemane, the agony in the garden, the fear of Jesus, the heart of Jesus fearful for the impending trial and death that he would suffer. Whose heart will not tremble? Whose heart will not cry out to God? Whose heart will not get tired and weary just looking at the prospect of a violent death? The heart of Jesus, fearful. But the letter to the Hebrews said, in that suffering, Jesus became perfect. Why? Because he learned obedience through what he suffered. Remember the agony in the garden. After the struggle, he said, "Not my will, but your will be done." That's the heart of Jesus. In the midst of suffering, turmoil, fear, what dominated was obedience to my Father. The obedience of a heart that does not abandon his covenant with God. And we find that in Jesus. Jesus could have said, "Father, let this cup pass away from me. No more. No more covenant. Forget the covenant. I'm suffering and I've suffered enough." But the heart of Jesus, fearful, was able to transcend the fear into perfection. The perfection of what? Obedience. And that obedience is the covenant. In the heart of Jesus, we find the fulfillment of the new covenant. A heart that will not say no to God in spite of all the pains and sufferings. And according to the second reading, this heart that remained obedient, faithful to the covenant, became the source of salvation to all of us, to our frail, sinful hearts. Let us look at the heart of Jesus, made perfect in covenant love by what He suffered.